All right, it's been a minute, but I'm going to continue reading as part of my monthly reading goals to finish this book, which I've started on this channel. A Vindication of the Rights of Women. Woman. I think it's woman. Yeah, it's woman. We're on chapter 7. Modesty. Comprehensively considered and not as a sexual virtue. Modesty. Sacred offspring of sensibility and reason, true delicacy of mind. May I, unblamed, presume to investigate thy nature, and trace to its covert the mild charm that, mellowing each harsh feature of a character, renders what would otherwise only inspire cold admiration lovely. Thou that smoothest the wrinkles of wisdom, and softenest the tone of the sublimest virtues till they all melt into humanity, thou that spreadest the ethereal cloud that surrounding love heightens every beauty, it half shades breathing these coy sweets that steal into the heart, charm the senses, modulate for me the language of persuasive reason, till I rouse from my sex from the flowery bed on which they supinely sleep life away. In speaking of the association of our ideas, I have noticed two distinct modes, and in defining modesty, it appears to me equally proper to discriminate that purity of mind, which is the effect of chastity, from a simplicity of character that leads us to form a just opinion of ourselves, equally distant from vanity or presumption, though by no means incompatible with a lofty consciousness of our own dignity. Modesty, modesty in the latter signification of the term, is that soberness of mind which teaches a man not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think, and should be distinguished from humility, because humility is a kind of self-abasement. Okay. A modest man often conceives a great plan, and tenaciously adheres to it, conscious of his own strength, till success gives it a sanction and determines its character. Milton was not arrogant when he suffered a suggestion of judgment to escape him that proved a prophecy. When he suffered a suggestion of judgment to escape him, proved a prophecy. Nor was I don't know what she's talking about there. Nor was General Washington when he accepted the command of the American forces. I mean, yeah, okay. Washington was like one of the most humble, modest. Like, he literally imposed term limits on himself like 200 years before the latter has always been characterized as a modest man. But had he been merely humble, he would probably have shrunk back irresolute, afraid of trusting to himself the direction of an enterprise on which so much depended. A modest man is steady, an humble man timid, and a vain one presumptuous. This is the judgment which the observation of many characters has led to form. Jesus Christ was modest. Okay, so modest means steady. Moses was humble, which means timid. And Peter was vain, presumptuous. Okay. Thus discriminating modesty from humility in one case, I do not mean to confound it with bashfulness in the other. Bashfulness, in fact, is so distinct from modesty that the most bashful lass or raw country lout often become the most impudent. For their bashfulness being merely an instinctive timidity of ignorance, custom soon changes it into assurance. Excuse me. The shameless behavior of the prostitutes who infest the streets of this metropolis, raising alternate emotions of pity and disgust, may serve to illustrate this remark. They trample on virgin bashfulness with a sort of bravado, and glorying in their shame, become more audaciously lewd than men. however depraved, to whom this sexual quality has not been gratuitously granted, ever appear to be. But these poor ignorant wretches never had any modesty to lose, when they consign themselves to infamy. For modesty is a virtue, not a quality. So like you have to earn it and exhibit it. No, they were only bashful, shamefaced innocents, and losing their innocence, their shamefacedness was rudely brushed off. And losing their innocence, their shamefacedness was rudely brushed off. A virtue would have left some vestiges in the mind, had it been sacrificed to passion, to make us respect the grand ruin. Purity of mind, or that genuine delicacy, which is the only virtuous support of chastity, is near akin to that refinement of humanity, which never resides in any but cultivated minds. Purity of mind, okay. It is something nobler than innocence. It is the delicacy of reflection, and not the coyness of ignorance. The reserve of reason, which like habitual cleanliness is seldom seen in any great degree, unless the soul is active, may easily be distinguished from rustic shyness or wanton skittishness, and so far from being incompatible with knowledge, this is a quote, I think looks like a poem. Is this? No, that's the footnote. Sorry. I'm skipping the footnote. Sorry. It is its fairest fruit. What a gross idea of modesty had the writer of the following remark. Quote, the lady who asked the question whether women may be instructed in the modern system of botany, consistently with female delicacy, was accused of ridiculous prudery. Nevertheless, if she had proposed the question to me, I should have certainly answered, they cannot. Okay. There's asterisk footnotes in this, and I don't. What do those go to? I don't really understand the footnote system, but thus is the fair book of knowledge to be shut with an everlasting seal. On reading similar passages, I have reverentially lifted up my eyes and my heart to Him who liveth forever and ever, gourd, and said, O my Father, thou hast by the very constitution of thy nature forbid thy child to seek thee in... Hast thou, by the very constitution of her nature forbid thy child to seek thee in the fair forms of truth. Botany, of course. And can her soul be sullied by the knowledge of that awfully calls her to thee? Fair point. I mean, it would be weird. It's like half of humankind that supposedly God created. It's just like, no, you're not equipped mentally to do these things, or physically to understand these things. I know physically understand, like, that doesn't make sense, but I mean, I don't know. Let's keep going. I have then philosophically pursued these reflections till I inferred that those women who have most improved their reason must have the most modesty. Let's just a quick refresher. Modesty is steadiness. That's the good one. Humbleness is humility, is timidness, right? Have the most modesty, though a dignified sedateness of deportment may have succeeded the playful, bewitching bashfulness of youth. Okay, so they're kind of calm and not playful, I guess, in youth at least. And thus I have argued to render chastity the virtue from which unsophisticated modesty will naturally flow. The attention should be called away from employments which only exercise the sensibility, and the heart made to beat time to humanity rather than to throb with love. The woman who has dedicated a considerable portion of her time to pursuits purely intellectual, and whose affections have been exercised by humane plans of usefulness, must have more purity of mind, as a natural consequence, than the ignorant beings whose time and thoughts have been occupied by gay pleasures or schemes to conquer hearts. Agreed. The regulation of behavior is not modesty, though those who study rules of decorum are, in general, termed modest women. Make the heart clean, let it expand and feel for all that is human, instead of being narrowed by selfish passions, and let the mind frequently contemplate subjects that exercise the understanding, without heeding the imagination, and artless modesty will give the finishing touches to the picture. Sounds nice. Be a good thing. She who can discern the dawn of immortality, in the streaks that shoot athwart the misty night of ignorance, promising a clearer day, will respect as a sacred temple the body that enshrines such an improvable soul. True love, likewise, spreads this kind of mystery, a mysterious sanctity, round the beloved object, making the lover most modest when in her presence. So reserved is affection that, receiving or returning personal endearments, it wishes not only to shun the human eye as a kind of profanation, but to use diffusely an encircling cloud of obscurity, to shut out even the saucy sparkling sunbeams. Yet that affection does not deserve the epithet of chaste, which does not receive a sublime gloom of tender melancholy that allows the mind, for a moment, to stand still and enjoy the present satisfaction. When a consciousness of divine presence is felt, for it must ever be the food of joy. As I have always been fond of tracing to its source in nature any prevailing custom, I have frequently thought that it was a sentiment of affection for whatever had touched the person of an absent or lost friend, which gave birth to that respect for relics, so much abused by selfish priests. So I gotta reread that. As I have always been fond of tracing to its source in nature any prevailing custom, I have frequently thought that it was a sentiment of affection for whatever had touched the person, of an absent or lost friend, which gave birth to that respect for relics, so much abused by selfish priests. Devotion or love may be allowed to hallow the garments as well as the person, for the lover must want fancy, who has not a sort of sacred respect for the glove or slipper of his mistress. He could not confound them with vulgar things of the same kind. This fine sentiment, perhaps, would not bear to be analyzed by the experimental philosopher, but of such stuff is human rapture made up. A shadowy phantom glides before us, obscuring every other object, yet when the soft cloud is grasped, the form melts into common air, leaving a solitary void, or sweet perfume stolen from the violet. That memory long holds dear, but I have tripped unawares on fairy ground, feeling the balmy gale of spring stealing on me through November frowns. As a sex, women are more chaste than men, and as modesty is the effect of chastity, they may deserve to have this virtue ascribed to them in rather an appropriated sense. Yet I must be allowed to add, and hesitating if, for I doubt whether chastity will produce modesty, though it may propriety of conduct, when it is merely respect for the opinion of the world. So chastity, she doubts whether chastity will produce modesty, which is the good trait, steadiness. Though it may produce propriety of conduct, meaning you're not going to do anything wrong. Probably you're not going to do anything, take any chances, do anything interesting, like whatever. When it is merely a respect of the opinion of the world. And when coquetry and the lovelorn tales of novelists employ the thoughts. Nay, from experience and reason, I should be led to expect to meet with more modesty amongst men than women. Even though women are more chaste, I think is the point she's making. Simply because men exercise their understandings, right, and they actually do stuff, okay, more than women. But with respect to propriety of behavior, excepting one class of females, women really focused on this girl's trying to make a living in the street. Excepting one class of females, I assume that's who she's talking about, women have evidently the advantage. What can be more disgusting than that impudent dross of gallantry, thought so manly, which makes many men stare insultingly at every female they meet? Can it be termed respect for the sex? Male case, okay. No. This loose behavior shews such habitual depravity, such weakness of mind, that it is vain to expect much public or private virtue, till both men and women grow more modest, till men, curbing the sensual fondness for the sex, or an affection of manly assurance, more properly speaking impudence, treat each other with respect, unless appetite or passion give the tone, peculiar to it, to their behavior. I mean even personal respect, the modest respect of humanity, and fellow feeling, not the libidinous mockery of gallantry, nor the insolent condescension of protectorship, like actually respecting women as people, yeah, and not just, trying to have sex with them or be their protectors as the default responses. To carry the observation still further, modesty must heartily disclaim and refuse to dwell with that debauchery of mind which leads a man coolly to bring forward, without a blush, indecent allusions with an A, or obscene witticisms, in the presence of a fellow creature. Women are now out of the question, for then it is brutality. Respect for man, as man, is the foundation of every noble sentiment. How much more modest is the libertine who obeys the call of appetite or fancy, than the lewd joker who sets the table in a roar. The libertine who obeys the call of appetite or fancy, okay. This is one of the many instances in which the sexual distinction respecting modesty has proved fatal to virtue and happiness. It is, however, carried still further. And woman, weak woman, made by her education the slave of sensibility, is required on the most trying occasions to resist that sensibility. Can anything, says Knox, be more absurd than keeping women in a state of ignorance, and yet so vehemently to insist on their resisting temptation? Thus, when virtue or honor make it proper to check a passion. Sorry, I gotta get my highlighter out. When virtue or honor make it proper to check a passion, the burden is thrown on the weaker shoulders, women. Contrary to reason, that's what she's saying. I'm not saying they're weaker. Contrary to reason and true modesty, which at least should render the self-denial mutual, to say nothing of the generosity of bravery, supposed to be a manly virtue. Excuse me. In the same strain runs Rousseau's and Dr. Gregory's advice respecting modesty, strangely miscalled, for they both desire a wife to leave it in doubt whether sensibility or weakness led her to her husband's arms. The woman is immodest who can let the shadow of a doubt remain in her husband's mind a moment. But to the state But to state the subject in a different light, the want of modesty, which I principally deplore as subversive of morality, arises from the state of warfare so strenuously supported by voluptuous men, as the very essence of modesty, though in fact its bane. Because it is a refinement on lust that men fall into, who have not sufficient virtue to relish the innocent pleasures of love. A man of delicacy carries his notions of modesty still further, for neither weakness nor sensibility will gratify him. He looks for affection. Again, men boast of their triumphs over women. What do they boast of? Truly, the creature of sensibility was surprised by her sensibility into folly, into vice, and the dreadful reckoning falls heavily on her own weak head when reason wakes. For where art thou to find comfort, forlorn and disconsolate one? He who ought to have directed thy reason and supported thy weakness has betrayed thee. This is interesting. Like, men as more educated, more supposedly capable of exhibiting modesty, humility, more quote-unquote advanced traits that women are incapable of, according to people of this time, and then women are blamed if two people fall into, have sex. I mean, that's what she's talking about. Or have, untoward romantic relationships. And then it's all the woman's fault, even though she hasn't even been expected to learn about, talk about, philosophize about, write about any kind of advanced emotions that would, presumably equip her to have more advanced thoughts about these things, and is only talked about in terms of falling in love and finding a husband and stuff like that. But then it's her fault when, her default may be to love somebody. Not really fair. In a dream of passion, thou consented to wander through flowery lawns, and heedlessly stepping over the precipice to which thy guide, instead of guarding, lured thee. Thou startest from thy dream only to face a sneering, frowning world, and to find thyself alone in a waste. For he that triumphed in thy weakness is now pursuing new conquests. But for thee there is no redemption on this side of the grave. And what resource hast thou in an invenerated mind to raise a sinking heart? But if the sexes be really to live in a state of warfare, if nature have pointed it out, let them act nobly, or let pride whisper to them that the victory is mean when they merely vanquish sensibility. The real conquest is that over affection, not taken by surprise, when, like Eloisa, a woman gives up all the world deliberately for love. I do not now consider the wisdom or virtue of such a sacrifice. I only contend that it was a sacrifice to affection and not merely to sensibility, though she had her share. And I must be allowed to call her a modest woman. Before I dismiss this part of the subject by saying that till men are more chaste than women, that till men are more chaste, women will be immodest. So until men actually, aren't just trying to go after women, it's gonna be difficult for women to be the, develop those steadiness, modesty, those types of things, especially in the eyes of society, presumably. Where indeed, could modest women find husbands from whom they would not continually turn with disgust? Modesty must be equally cultivated by both sexes, or it will ever remain a sickly hothouse plant, whilst the affection of it, the fig leaf borrowed by wantonness, may give a zest to voluptuous enjoyments. She's such a fucking good writer. Holy God, this is so good. Men will probably still insist that woman ought to have more modesty than man. But it is not dispassionate reasoners who will most earnestly oppose my opinion. No, they are often men of fancy, the favorites of the sex, who outwardly respect and inwardly despise the weak creatures whom they thus sport with. They cannot submit to resign the highest sensual gratification, nor even to relish the epicurism of virtue, self-denial. To take another view of the subject, confining my remarks to women, the ridiculous falsities which are told to children from mistaken notions of modesty tend very clearly to inflame their imaginations and set their little minds to work respecting subjects which nature intended they should think of till the body arrived at some degree of maturity. There's a footnote. I didn't want to stop mid-sentence. Footnote 1. Children very early see cats with their kittens, birds with their young ones, etc. Why then are they not told that their mothers carry and nourish them in the same way? As there would then be no appearance of mystery, they would never think of the subject more. Truth may always be told to children, if it be told gravely, but it is the immodesty of affected modesty that does all the mischief. And this smoke heats the imagination by vainly endeavoring to obscure certain objects. If indeed children could be kept entirely from the proper company, we should never allude to any such subjects. But as this is impossible, it is best to tell them the truth, especially as such information not interesting to them will make no impression on their imagination. Okay, just that animals take care of young female and male. Is that the point she's making? The same exact way. They're not like separated and raised differently. Back to the body. Then the passions naturally begin to take place of the senses as instruments to unfold the understanding and form the moral character. In nurseries and boarding schools, I fear, girls are the first spoiled, particularly in the latter boarding schools. A number of girls sleep in the same room and wash together. And though I should be sorry to contaminate an innocent creature's mind by instilling false delicacy, for those indecent prudish notions which early cautions respecting the other sex naturally engender, I should be very anxious to prevent their acquiring nasty or immodest habits. And as many girls have learned very nasty tricks from ignorant servants and mixing them thus indiscriminately together is very improper. To say the truth, women are, in general, too familiar with each other, which leads to that gross degree of familiarity that so frequently renders the marriage state unhappy. Why in the name of decency are sisters, female intimates, or ladies and their waiting women to be so grossly familiar as to forget the respect which one creature owes to another, that squeamish delicacy which shrinks from the most disgusting offices when affection or humanity leads us to watch at a sick pillow, is despicable. But why women in health should be more familiar with each other than men are, when they boast of the superior delicacy, is a solecism in manners which I could never resolve. In order to preserve health and beauty, I should earnestly recommend frequent ablutions, to dignify my advice, that it may not offend the fastidious ear, and by example, girls ought to be taught to wash and dress alone, without any distinction of rank. And if custom should make them require some little assistance, let them not require it till that part of the business is over, which ought never to be done before a fellow creature, because it is an insult to the majesty of human nature. So I'm not 100% sure what she's talking about. I assume what she's saying is like men have privacy and like are able to, I don't know, wash, bathe, dress, take care of their bodies, pop zits, whatever it is people do. But women aren't, and it kind of makes them presumably, like, I don't know. It probably has some sort of damaging effect where it certainly could bring up, insecurity. What if it mean? Can you, like, I don't know, getting dressed in front of everybody your entire life, like a gang of people. Yeah, lack of self-assurance, like not the ability to do what you maybe need to do, or like not creating independence and confidence, maybe. Kind of makes sense. Not on the score of modesty, but decency, for the care which some modest women take, making at the time a display of that care, not to let their legs be seen, is as childish as immodest. I could proceed still further, till I animadverted on some still more nasty customs, which men never fall into. Secrets are told where silence ought to reign. In that regard to cleanliness, which some religious sects have, perhaps carried too far, especially the Essenes amongst the Jews, by making that an insult to God which is only an insult to humanity, is violated in a beastly manner. How can delicate women obtrude on notice that part of the animal economy which is so very disgusting? And it is not very rational. Oh, do they have to go to the bathroom in front of each other? Is that what she's talking about? And it is not very rational to conclude that, excuse me, that women who have not been taught to respect the human nature of their own sex, in these particulars, will not long respect the mere difference of sex in their husbands. After their maidenish bashfulness is once lost, I, in fact, have generally observed that women fall into old habits and treat their husbands as they did their sisters, or female acquaintance. Oh, this is odd. So they're too comfortable in front of their husbands, and they're like taking dumps in front of them and stuff. I'm not sure, 100% sure. This is kind of odd. I'm not sure. Besides, women from necessity, because their minds are not cultivated, have recourse very often to what I familiarly term bodily writ, and their intimacies are of the same kind. In short, with respect to both mind and body, they are too intimate. That decent personal reserve, which is the foundation of dignity of character, must be kept up between woman and woman, and their minds will never gain strength, or modesty. On this account, also, I object to many females being shut up together in nurseries, schools, or convents. I cannot recollect without indignation the jokes and hoyden tricks which knots of young women indulge themselves in, when in my youth accident threw me, an awkward rustic, in their way. They were almost on par with the double meanings which shake the convivial table when the glass has circulated freely. But it is vain to attempt to keep the heart pure, unless the head is furnished with ideas, and set to work to compare them in order to acquire judgment, by generalizing simple ones, and modesty, by making the understanding damp the sensibility. It may be thought that I lay too great stress on personal reserve, but it is ever the handmaid of modesty. It makes sense. So that were I to name the graces that ought to adorn beauty, I should instantly exclaim, cleanliness, neatness, and personal reserve. It is obvious, I suppose, that the reserve I mean has nothing sexual in it, and that I think it equally necessary in both sexes. So necessary, indeed, is that reserve and cleanliness which indolent women too often neglect, that I will venture to affirm, and when 2 or 3 women live in the same house, that one will be most respected by the male part of the family, who reside with them, leaving love entirely out of the question, who pays this kind of habitual respect to their person. When domestic friends meet in a morning, there will naturally prevail an affectionate seriousness, especially if each look forward to the discharge of daily duties. And it may be reckoned fanciful, but this sentiment has frequently risen spontaneously in the mind. I have been pleased, after breathing the sweet, bracing morning air, to see the same kind of freshness in the countenances I particularly loved. I was glad to see them braced, as it were, for the day, and ready to run their course with the sun. The greetings of affection in the morning are, by these means, more respectful than the familiar tenderness which frequently prolongs the evening talk. Nay, I have often felt hurt, not to say disgusted, when a friend has appeared whom I parted with full dressed the evening before, with her clothes huddled on, because she chose to indulge herself in bed till the last moment. Okay. Domestic affection can only be kept alive by these neglected attentions. Yet if men and women took half as much pains to dress habitually neat as they do to ornament, or rather to disfigure their persons, being a little crotchety right now, I'm not going to lie, much would be done towards the attainment of purity of mind. But women only dress to gratify men of gallantry. For the lover is always best pleased with the simple garb that fits close to the shape. There is an impertinence in ornaments that rebuffs affection, because love always clings around the idea of home. But isn't she, I don't know, doesn't this miss the point a little bit that she was making previously, that, like, you know, women are getting dressed together and there's no, I don't know. She seems to be shitting on, I don't know, she uses a specific example of a person not showing up particularly, you know, well dressed or whatever, and like put together, and but isn't that person also dealing with all the things that she's described that make it difficult? As a sex, women are habitually indolent, and everything tends to make them so. I do not forget the spurts of activity which sensibility produces, but as these flights of feelings only increase the evil, they are not to be confounded with the slow, orderly walk of reason. So great in reality is their mental and bodily indolence that I fear their body be strengthened, and their understanding enlarged by active exertions. There is little reason to expect that modesty will take place of bashfulness. They may find it prudent to assume its semblance, but the fair veil will only be worn on gala days. Perhaps there is not a virtue that mixes so kindly with every other as modesty. It is the pale moonbeam that renders more interesting every virtue it softens, giving mild grandeur to the contracted horizon. Nothing can be more beautiful than the poetical fiction which makes Diana, with her silver crescent, the goddess of chastity. I have sometimes thought that wandering with sedate step in some lonely recess, a modest dame of antiquity must have felt a glow of conscious dignity when, after contemplating the soft shadowy landscape, she has invited with placid fervor the mild reflection of her sister's beams to turn to her chaste bosom. A Christian has still nobler motives to incite her to preserve her chastity and acquire modesty, for her body has been called the temple of the living God, of the God who requires more than modesty of mien. His eye searcheth the heart, and let her remember that if she hope to find favor in the sight of purity itself, her chastity must be founded on modesty, and not on worldly prudence, or verily a good reputation will be her only reward. For that awful intercourse, that sacred communication, which virtue establishes between man and his Maker, must give rise to the wish of being pure as he is pure. Okay. After the foregoing remarks, it is almost superfluous to add that I consider all those feminine airs of maturity which succeeded bashfulness, to which truth is sacrificed, to secure the heart of a husband, or rather to force him to be still a lover, when nature would, had she not been interrupted in her operations, have made love give place to friendship, as immodest. The tenderness which a man will feel for the mother of his children is an excellent substitute for the ardor of unsatisfied passion. But to prolong that ardor, it is indelicate, not to say immodest, for women to feign an unnatural coldness of constitution. Women, as well as men, ought to have the common appetites and passions of their nature. They are only brutal when unchecked by reason, but the obligation to check them is the duty of mankind, not a sexual duty. Not based on sex, I think is what she means. Nature, in these respects, may safely be left to herself. Let women only acquire knowledge and humanity, and love will teach them modesty. There is no need of falsehoods, disgusting as futile, for studied rules of behavior only impose on shallow observers. A man of sense soon sees through and despises affectation. The behavior of young people to each other, as men and women, is the last thing that should be thought of in education. In fact, behavior in most circumstances is now so much thought of that simplicity of character is rarely to be seen. Yet, if men were only anxious to cultivate each virtue and let it take root firmly in the mind, the grace resulting from it, its natural exterior mark, would soon strip affectation of its flaunting plumes, because fallacious as unstable as the conduct that is not founded upon truth. Would ye, O my sisters, really possess modesty, ye must remember that the possession of virtue of any denomination is incompatible with ignorance and vanity. Ye must acquire that soberness of mind which the exercise of duties and the pursuit of knowledge alone inspire, or ye will still remain in a doubtful dependent situation, and only be loved whilst ye are fair. The downcast eye, the rosy blush, the retiring grace, are all proper in their season. But modesty, being the child of reason, cannot long exist with a sensibility that is not tempered by reflection. Besides, when love, even innocent love, is the whole employ of your lives, your hearts will be too soft to afford modesty that tranquil retreat, where she delights to dwell in close union with humanity. Okay, wow, like really powerful and just amazingly well written stuff. So yeah, that's chapter 7, and we'll go on to chapter 8 hopefully soon.